Hello everybody and welcome to Every Movie Ever. I'm your host Eric and I am happy to say that we here at Every Movie Ever are lean, mean, movie reviewing machines as we keep trying to review every movie ever made, starting today with The Foot Fist Way. Now this was the movie that sort of introduced the world to Danny McBride, who is and his frequent collaborator Jody Hill. They are a very sort of they speak kind of a very specific comedy language. If you've probably seen Danny McBride in any number of movies, from big movies where he plays small roles like Tropic Thunder or the recent Alien Covenant. But he's probably best known for the movies and TV shows that he's a star in, particularly the HBO shows Eastbound and Down, and most recently Vice Principals. Danny McBride has sort of made a career out of playing what they tend to call capable idiots. So he's kind of a dumb guy who's has a big ego and is very full of himself, very cocky, but like I say, is also very not particularly bright and has a hard time fitting in socially in a lot of ways. Foot Fist Way is sort of their first go at that. This movie features Danny McBride as a karate instructor. It's sort of a low-budget affair, but it's pretty fun. Danny McBride gets a lot of mileage out of the character. I liked it a fair amount. I'm going to give it 3.5 stars. We here at Every Movie Ever were, of course, big fans of The Kingsman, and we're very excited to hear about a Kingsman sequel featuring a lot of people returning in front of and behind the camera. This is called Kingsman: The Golden Circle. You've got your Taron Egerton back as the lead guy. He's a lot of fun in these. His performance as a sort of lower-class British guy who gets enrolled into this secret high-class spy organization is usually really fun, and that's no different here. Colin Firth is there to bring the movie a lot of gravitas, as is Mark Strong, who's a guy who often plays a villain, but in these Kingsman movies plays a sort of Q role, the gadget guy. And he serves as a real sort of father figure and mentor to Eggsy, which is the name of Taron Egerton's character. This movie also has Colin Firth. Colin Firth played, even more of a father figure, a senior agent and mentor to Eggsy in the first one. He's back, and I want to talk about that more in a little bit. This movie also adds Julianne Moore as the villain, and she is a ton of fun in this movie. She's an international drug kingpin who's very obsessed with like nostalgia and the 50s and things like that. And so she's a lot of fun to have in this movie. Also a lot of fun, Elton John playing himself is a real hoot. He gets some really fun things to do. And of course, Matthew Vaughn is back to direct, and he's a really capable director who I've enjoyed most of his films, but I would really like to see him back behind the camera doing more than just the kind of movies he's been doing, which is lately he's almost exclusively been filming adaptations of Mark Millar comic books, both in the terms of the Kingsman movies and in the Kick-Ass movies that he did. I'd like to see him maybe do something a little more original, a little more out of his own brain, but it is what it is, and he's a very good director. So now this movie is not as good as the first Kingsman, and that largely falls on the shoulders of, well, I don't want to say it falls on the shoulders of Colin Firth, but it falls on the shoulders of his character. So Colin Firth, spoiler alert, is killed off in the first Kingsman movie, and they decide to bring him back in this one. And the way they bring him back is, pretty silly and implausible. He feels like a third wheel throughout the thing. I think it would have been a stronger movie with Eggsy out on his own. A big part of that first Kingsman movie was in the third act, Eggsy having to grow and come into his own and be his own man and agent, and I would have liked to have seen that continue through this movie without both the crutch of Colin Firth and also the fact that Colin Firth does become this sort of albatross that the movie has to drag around as he's sort of dealing with some sort of like PTSD and memory loss things. It's a lot like when they bring Tommy Lee Jones back in the second Men in Black, and it doesn't really work. Again, though, this is a pretty fun movie. The plot does involve our Kingsman characters going to America and teaming up with their American counterparts, the so-called statesmen. And so you get some fun stuff from Jeff Bridges and from Magic Mike, I can't think, Channing Tatum. It's a fun movie, just not as good as the first. I'm going to give it 3.5 stars. All right, calling all horror hounds. If you've been watching this show, you know that pretty recently I revisited Halloween, the original John Carpenter classic, for the first time in a long time, and thought it was absolutely terrific. It's a movie that I had seen and liked before, but this time was finally the time that I fell in love with it and appreciated it as the towering horror classic that it is. Now, since I had had sort of a, I don't want to say ambivalent, but a like not love relationship with Halloween previously, I had not really looked at any of the Halloween sequels. Well, of course, now that has all changed. A while back we reviewed Halloween 2 and I liked it a fair amount. The other, Halloween 3 is of course its own monster, so the other day I decided to finally watch Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. Now, I didn't know a ton about this one going into it. I'm aware that it is the first of a couple that focus on Michael Myers trying to kill his niece. And indeed, this is the introduction of that character. Her name's Jamie. She's a young girl, like 10 or 11 years old, which changes things by making a smaller child sort of the object of Michael's his murderousness, his malice is what I was going to say. That changes things a little bit, and makes it can in some ways heighten the tension. You never want to see a kid get murdered in these things. Overall, it's a movie that I thought was dumb fun. It's certainly not up to the highs of the original Halloween or of its sequel, but it is its own thing. It services Michael pretty well. The shape is back and in fairly good standing, although toward the end of the movie, when he starts having an inability to murder a little kid, that doesn't speak terribly well of him. And more than the first movie, this is sort of a turn your brain off, good time, fun movie than anything else. A good afternoon cable classic. It does have very good atmosphere brought in by director Dwight H. Little, who does really capture that sort of the difficult to define and to capture stalker movie suspense and atmosphere throughout. I also want to mention that there is one of the funnest things in this movie, outside of, I do like Jamie, and I like Jamie's older sister and her friends. The friends, of course, end up being most of the cannon fodder for Michael. But the other big highlight of this movie is the hillbilly characters who show up once they've heard that Michael's back and form a posse with a pickup truck and shotguns to try to take Michael out. That does involve one of them accidentally shooting the other. It's that sort of movie. It's not as intentionally goofy as like an Evil Dead 2, but it is a fun time. I'm going to give Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, 2.5 stars. Of course, watching Halloween 4 led to watching Halloween 5. This is the revenge of Michael Myers. It's pretty much a direct sequel to Halloween 4. Jamie is back, and I didn't even mention at the end of Halloween 4, the review of Halloween 4, and this is a big problem on my part. Halloween 4 has a weird twist ending where, having seen all the carnage caused by Michael, now Jamie is turned into a murderer and has killed her mom. By Halloween 5, that is largely forgotten and set aside. Jamie is in a little kid insane asylum and has been struck mute by all of the horrors of the previous movie, which is weird. And that is the defining characteristic of Halloween 5. If Halloween 4 is a goofy good time, Halloween 5 is weird. Also sort of a good time, but it's actually kind of largely ho-hum. It's mostly boring until the weird stuff shows up. The scenes with Jamie at the asylum are all suitably weird, and her little kid friends there. There's a really weird barn party kind of at the end of the second act, at the beginning of the third, that's a good time. You see all of Jamie's family from the previous movie, her parents and her sister, they've gone on vacation, so we're left with Jamie's sister's friend as our main teen protagonist, and she goes to a teen barn party with a bunch of weirdos, including this girl who wanders around a barn for a while, and we're supposed to follow that she's being stalked by Michael, although why he doesn't just get to business, I don't know. But it involves her at one point picking up a kitten, carrying the kitten around for a good while before coming to the realization of, well, I don't like cats. Weird stuff. It's a pretty pedestrian slasher movie, like I say, elevated occasionally by weirdness. Donald Pleasance is back for this one. I forgot to mention that he's back for Halloween 4 as Dr. Loomis, who had previously been the doctor who tried to initially cure Michael and then just tried to contain him. Well, he was back in 4, and, you know, pretty good presence. In 5, he has turned the nuts dial all the way up, and he is chewing scenery and screaming and raving, and that's a pretty good time. But none of that can really overcome the, you know, the sort of the monotony, the retread feeling. This doesn't have any of the atmosphere of the previous one. I'm just going to give Halloween 5 2 stars. All right, let's head over to Hollywood Classics. So we're sort of cheating in that this is, while an old movie and a classic film, it is not from Hollywood, it is from England. Yeah, this time we're going to talk about Kind Hearts and Coronets, a classic English comedy starring the great Sir Alec Guinness. Now this is one of those movies that I had heard of for a long time and had never seen, saw it was going to be on Turner Classics, thought let's give it a shot. Now, what I didn't know is that this movie is based on the same book as the quasi-recent Broadway smash, A Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder. So they share a pretty identical storyline. Now, my wife and I, we went and saw Gentleman's Guide when it came to Minneapolis here, and we absolutely loved it. We thought it was just terrific. One of the best, you know, musicals we have ever seen in a live people acting theater setting. So we absolutely loved that. So when I twigged watching Kind Hearts and Coronet, so when I twigged to it being the same story, I was like, oh, well, I liked that other story. I liked it so much in the play, maybe I'll like it a lot here. And here's the thing, on my initial viewing, I didn't love it. The story centers around a young man whose mother has passed on, and he's never really known his family. He doesn't have a ton of money, and he comes to find out that his mom was actually a member of this very rich family that had disowned her when she had had him. And so he decides that he wants the family fortune, and the way to do that is to kill the 8 or 9 people in line for the inheritance ahead of him. And then these 8 or 9 people are all played by Alec Guinness. So you have Guinness playing these multiple roles and doing an excellent job with it. I suppose my problem with the movie initially is that Gentleman's Guide can be a very colorful and broad play, while this movie is sort of plays things a little closer to the vest and is a lot more dry. But since viewing it, I have to admit, it's been growing on me. It's one of those movies that is stuck in my head and that I've been thinking about. Guinness, again, I can't say enough how tremendous he is. The whole cast, which is a group of people who, you know, as British actors, I'm not super familiar with, but I did like all of them. I would say I liked the play more. And I particularly liked the conclusion of the play more because of a couple of twists, both a romantic twist about who our hero ends up with, and a twist regarding the family, which I don't want to spoil because The Gentleman's Guide's not an easy thing to see, and it's not easy necessarily to go to a play if it's not in town, but I don't want to spoil it because I liked it a lot. Regardless, this isn't a review of that, it's a review of Kind Hearts and Coronets. It was a movie I liked, and it's a movie I would like to revisit. I'm going to give it 3.5 stars. Okay, folks, it's time for MST3 A to Z. This is, of course, the part of the show where we are reviewing every Mystery Science Theater 3000 movie in alphabetical order. And today we're going to talk about The Black Scorpion. This is a movie that was featured in the very first season of Mystery Science Theater, so it's one I hadn't ever watched because, and the Mystery Science Theater guys will tell you this, they'll say, don't watch the first season, it's not great. But I enjoyed this episode, and I kind of enjoyed the movie. This is a Western affair that takes on a sci-fi monster twist as our Western heroes have to fight giant scorpion. Listen, to be completely honest with you, it's a movie that does leave the memory almost immediately. It doesn't really feature memorable characters or events. What's memorable is that giant rampaging scorpion brought to life with terrific stop-motion animation of the Harryhausen school. It's not Harryhausen. It's, I believe, one of his mentors did the animation for this. So watching that scorpion run around is a ton of fun, even if the movie itself is not super memorable. I'm going to give it 2 stars. Well, friends, it is time for nobody's favorite part of the show. This is the worst of the week. This week's worst of the week is a recent flop at the box office. It's The Mummy. Yes, Tom Cruise decides he's going to fight a mummy in a movie that was supposed to be the first of a bizarre experiment wherein Universal Studios thought they could create their own Marvel-style shared universe of super monsters, beginning with Tom Cruise in The Mummy. This movie is a movie that does not work in really any way and is sort of fascinating for it. Tom Cruise, of course, is the star who I think is supposed to be a roguish archaeologist type who finds the titular mummy. But they make the odd choice of making him not charming. You see, gang, the whole point that you're going to go to a Tom Cruise movie is for Tom Cruise. And the whole deal about Tom Cruise is that he's supposed to be charming. So having him play a really unlikable character who isn't just some, adventuring Indiana Jones type archaeologist, but is a member of the United States military who goes out of his way and uses, sort of deceitful methods to loot tombs in the areas he's supposed to be protecting does not work. There's something about other mummy movies where they're set in like the 10s and 20s and 30s, where this idea of an archaeologist who goes into a place and takes the antiquities can work, because that was, the way things were at the time. But now when he's looting tombs in a war zone, it feels like it feels as gross as it is. And so that doesn't work. And then plus, Tom, like I say, his charming isn't working in this one. As we watch him be a generally bad character to his friends, to his romantic interest, to really everyone, doesn't work there. Well, let's talk about his romantic interest for a minute. It was an actress I was unfamiliar with. Her name is Annabelle Wallis, and she's pretty unmemorable. Again, for a movie that's supposed to be the foundation stone of a great, multi-movie franchise, a multi-character franchise, you would think you would want to go all out with the cast of this thing, and she's just not doing it. She's, sort of a nondescript Tom Cruise leading lady who, and I don't mean to rag on her. It's, as far as how good an actress she is, I think the answer to that is that I don't know. The script really doesn't give her anything to work with. I don't feel like the direction was there for her. This is the sort of movie that, as bad as it is, for the character to work, you almost need to cast somebody who's coming into it with a cachet, an actress we all already know and are familiar with. But given that even Cruise can't, the legendary Cruise charm gets buried in this thing, well, who's to say? This movie also introduces, in sort of a Nick Fury role, a bizarre take on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, as played by what's his name? Russell Crowe. That's it. Sometimes I blank out, guys. Russell Crowe is this universe version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, who runs a secret spy organization, but who has to inject himself with a huge chemical syringe every seemingly like 20 minutes to not turn into Mr. Hyde. Of course, he turns into Mr. Hyde in the course of the movie, and you might be expecting like a big Hulk kind of a character, but ultimately he's just a slightly larger Russell Crowe. It's very disappointing. It's unnecessary. It's extraneous to the plot. It detracts from the mumminess of it all, and in addition, it's a lame effect. Who I do want to give a lot of props for is a young actress named Sofia Boutella, who is the titular mummy. She is terrific in this. We've seen her before in the initial Kingsman movie. She was the best part of the third new Star Trek movie as a character named Jayla. She's in Atomic Blonde, and she's great there too. This is an up-and-coming, super charming and really capable physically and in action sense young actress. I was very excited to see her as the Mummy in this. Unfortunately, she doesn't get to do as much as we would maybe like. And I'm going to go ahead and spoil the end for you. The end's a super bummer in that she is defeated and Tom Cruise steals her mummy powers. So we don't even get to look forward to seeing Sophia return as the Mummy in maybe a better movie. All of this, sort of combines into a general disappointment in that what I've discovered recently is I like mummy movies. I like a movie where there's a mummy that's the monster in it, but here's the problem. The good ones are extremely few and far between, and this is not one of them. It is a fascinating failure, if only to watch it for those seeds of what this greater expanded universe was going to be. But as a movie all on its own, it doesn't work in really any sense. Only because of that little bit of fascination to it, I'm going to give it 2 stars. As always on this show, we're going to go from the worst to the best. This is the best of the bunch. This week's best of the bunch is Logan Lucky, the latest feature from Steven Soderbergh. You might know him as the director of the various Oceans movies, your Oceans 11, your Oceans 12, and your Oceans, wait for it, 13. Well, he's back with a new heist film that he's sort of dubbed Ocean 7-Eleven, and that this is about a group of guys who are not as polished and refined as the Ocean's 11 crew. This is a sort of more rural heist movie, as our heroes who are miners and bartenders decide they're going to knock over a NASCAR event. This is such a fun movie. And a big key to the fun of it is how seriously it takes its characters. The idea of that, an Ocean 7-Eleven, could very quickly become derogatory and somewhat offensive, right? Like this could very easily become a sort of hee-haw sort of an affair where it feels like we're making fun of the characters. But this movie in no way does that. Instead, it finds the humanity in each of them and really does a great job of creating sympathy for every character, despite the fact that they're involved in a criminal enterprise. It's a very fun movie. The cast is terrific. Your main guy is Channing Tatum. He's great. His brother is Adam Driver, who's been making a big name for himself in the Star Wars movies. Well, here he's proving that, no, he's a really good actor, too. And they're assisted in their heist by Daniel Craig, who plays hugely against his James Bond type as a super nutty good old boy who's ready to blow some stuff up. He is, as great as everyone is, Daniel Craig is the shining diamond in the middle of this thing and is not to be missed. The movie is super smartly written and plotted and directed. It never really descends into huge stretches of exposition where they explain out what the heist is going to be, but you get to have the fun and joy of figuring out the heist as it goes along, and then noticing little details that sort of come back later in a very successful way. Sort of the sole bad spot of this movie is that I don't know how he keeps ending up in our movies and TV shows, folks, but Seth MacFarlane, the creator of Family Guy, who is generally just a cocky and smarmy, an unpleasant presence, is doing all of that here. Now, granted, he's playing a cocky, smarmy, and unpleasant character, so perhaps that works for him, but no one ever wants to be reminded of the existence of a Seth MacFarlane. Look at the Oscars. But he's here playing a character who is sponsoring one of the race car drivers. He's a rich guy, and he earlier on gets into a fight with our heroes in a way that threatens to come back later in the movie, but ultimately feels inconsequential to the plot. Again, this is a really terrific and fun movie that I would recommend you run out and see. It's a movie that's very respectful of its characters when a similar movie by other directors wouldn't be. And again, it's really smart and tight. It's the best heist movie I've seen in a long time. I'm giving it 4 stars. All right, that is going to do it for this episode of Every Movie Ever. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be back next time as we keep trying to review every movie ever made.